Hello, welcome back to Kim Reads to continue with Wicked. A phalanx of gale forcers appeared from an alley between the theater and the school next door. They took up their places before the bank of glass doors in front. Elphaba mounted the steps of an ancient wool market, a kind of stone gazebo. Fiyero saw she had something under her cloak. Explosives? Some magic implement? Did she have colleagues in the square? Were they lining themselves up with one another? The crowd kept getting thicker as the hour for the oratorio drew near. Inside the glass doors, house management was busy lining up stanchions and stringing velvet ropes to promote a genteel entry in the hall. Nobody pushed and shoved into a public place like the very rich, Fiyero knew. A carriage came around the corner of a building on the far side of the square. It couldn't come up right to the doors of the theater as the crowds were too dense, but it proceeded as far as it was able. Sensing the presence of someone with authority, the crowd drew a little still. Could this be the elusive wizard on an unannounced visit? A coachman in a tech fur headpiece flung the door open and reached his hand in to assist the passenger in alighting. Fiyero drew his breath. Fiyero stiffened into petrified wood. This was the target. Out onto the snowy street, in a tidal wave of black silk and silver spangles, swept a huge woman. She was magisterial and august. She was Madame Morrible. No other. Even Fiyero recognized her, having met her only once. Really? Only once? He saw that Elphaba knew this was the one she must kill. She had known this. In an instant, it was all dead clear. She was caught and captured and tried. Her motivations couldn't be more wonderful. She was merely a mad student from Madame Morrible's own Crage Hall. She carried a grudge she never forgot. It was too perfect. But could Madame Morrible be involved in intrigue with the wizard? Or was she just a diversion to make the minds of the authorities away from the more urgent target? Elphaba's cape twitched. Her hand went up and down inside it, as if priming something. Madame Morrible was growling a greeting to the crowd, which was not necessary in knowing who she was, appreciated the spectacle, if not the bulk of her arrival. The head of Crage Hall walked 4 steps towards the theater on the arm of a tick-tock minion. Elphaba leaned a little forward from under the wool market. Her chin was now sharply jutting out from her scarf, her nose aiming forward. She looked as if she could snip Madame Morrible into shreds, just like using serrated blades of her natural features. Her hands continued to figure out beneath the cape. But there were thrown open the doors of the building Madame Morrible was walking past. Not the theater, but the adjacent school, Madame Testadane's female seminary. Out in the doors swarmed a cluster, a little upper-class mob of schoolgirls. What were they doing on school on Lurleen Eves? Fiyero caught Elphaba looking wildly surprised. These girls were 6 or 7, small, creamy lumps of uncurled femininity, smoothed into furry muffs and tucked into furry scarves and tipped into boots with furry edges. They were laughing and singing, raucous and rough as the elite adults that would come. In their midst was a pantomime player, singing beneath the very preenalum. It was a man, as the convention had it, a man done up in silly clown-like makeup, and mocked the bouncing bosom, and a wig and extravagant skirts, and a straw hat, and a huge basket with trinkets and treasures spilling out. "Ooh la, society!" he fluted at Madame Morrible. Even Fairy Prunella can have a present for the lucky pedestrian. For a moment, Fiyero thought the man in drag was going to pull out a knife and kill Madame Morrible right in front of the children. But no, espionage was organized, but not that organized. This was a real accident, a disruption. They hadn't figured out there being a school occasion this evening, nor on a screaming flock of schoolgirls greedily tugging at an actor in skirts and falsetto. Fiyero turned back and looked at Elphaba. Her face struggled with disbelief. The children were in the way of whatever she was supposed to do. They were a small, unruly mob, chasing around the head, teasing Prunella, leaping up at him, her, grabbing for precedence. The children were all accidental contacts, noisy, innocent neighbors of tycoons, despots, and butcher generals. He could see Elphaba working. He could see her hands fighting with each other to do it anyway, or to keep from doing it, whatever it was. Madame Morrible pushed in like a huge float on a Remembrance Day parade, and the doors of the theater opened for her. She passed grandly into safety. Outside, the children danced and sang in the snow. The crowd surged this way. Elphaba crumpled and sank against a pillar, shivering with self-loathing so violently that Pierre could see it from 50 yards away. He began to push it towards her, devil come what may, but by the time he had reached the steps she had, for the first and only time, managed to lose him. The audience filed into the theater. The children shrieked their song awash with greed and joy. The carriage that had brought Madame Morrible around was to draw up in the front of the theater and start its long wait for her to come in. Pierre paused, unsure there was a backup plan in case Elphaba had something else up her sleeve, in case the theater had exploded. Then he began to worry that, in the few minutes of losing sight of her, Elphaba had been rounded up by the gale force. Could they have whisked her out of sight that fast? What should he do if she came one of the disappeared? At a clip, he began back across town. Mercifully, he waited a waiting cab, and he had the cab drive him directly to the streets of warehouses adjacent to the military garrison in the city's 9th district. In a state of profound agitation, he arrived back at Elphaba's little ear atop the corn exchange. As he climbed the stairs, his bowels turned suddenly to water. It was the only effort he managed to make it to the chamber pot. His insides slopped noisily, wetly out, and he held his perspiring face in his hands. The cat was perched atop the wardrobe, glaring to him down, voided, washed down, and at loosely done up again, he tried to coax Malky with a bowl of milk. She would have none of it. He found a couple of dry crackers and ate them miserably, and then pulled on the chain to open the skylight to help air the room. A couple of plops of snow fell, and there was no melting. It was that cold in the damn place. He went to build up the fire, pulling open the iron door of the stove. The fire caught, then flared, and the shadows detached themselves and shadows at will, but these shadows moved fast across the room at him before he could register what they were. Except that they were 3, 4, or 5, and they were wearing black clothes and black char on their faces, and their heads were wrapped in colored scarves like the ones he had brought for Elphaba, for Samira. The shoulder of what he saw the glint of a gilded epaulet, a senior member of the Gale Force. There was a club, and it beat down on him, like the kick of a horse, like the falling limb of a tree lighting. There must be pain, but he was too surprised to notice. There must be blood, squirting a ruby stain on the white cat, making it flinch. He saw it open, twin gold and green moons befitting of the season, and the cat scarpered through the open skylight and was lost in the snowy night. The youngest maunt was obliged to answer the convent doors if the bell sounded at mealtime. In fact, she was clearing away the remains of pumpkin soup and rye brisk. The other mounts, already wafting in a cerebral mood toward their cloister chapel upstairs. She hesitated before deciding to answer the bell. In another 3 minutes, she too would be losing herself in devotions, and the bell would have gone unheeded. She had rather get the dishes to soak, frankly, but the seasonal cheer bullied her into charity. She opened the door to find a figure crouched like a monkey in the dark of a stone porch. Beyond, snow was wrinkling the facade of the adjacent Church of St. Glinda, making it look like a reflection only right up. The streets were empty, and a noise of choirs came filtering out in the candlelit church. "What is it?" the novice asked, remembering then to add, "Good Lorimus, my friend." She said at once that the blood on the odd green wrist and the darting look in the eyes, then the holiday decency required to drag the creature outside. But she could hear her sister mounts assembling in their private chapel, and the mother mount began to sing a prelude in her silvery contralto. This was the novice's first big liturgical event as a member of the community. She didn't want to miss a minute of it. "Come with me, Dolly," she said, and the creature, a young woman a year or two older than she was, managed to straighten up enough to walk or hobble like a cripple, like a person so malnourished that their extensors cannot flex and their limbs looked as they were about to snap. The novice stopped in a washroom to rinse the blood off the wrist and make sure it was indeed splattermess from the beheading of some hen for the holiday supper, and not a sad attempt at suicide. But then the stranger recoiled from the heat of water and looked so deranged and happy that the notice stopped. She noticed a dry towel instead. The monks were beginning antiphonamical chants upstairs. How maddening! The novice took path of least resistance. She dragged the forlorn thing down the street from the winter salon, where the old retired biddies lived out their lives in a haze of amnesia, and the discreet placed clumps of marginium plants whose sweet miasma helped mask the odors of the old and incontinent. The crones lived in a time of their own. They couldn't be carried upstairs in the sacred chapel. Well, anyway. "Look, I'll sit you down here," she said to the woman. "I don't know if you need sanctuary or food or bath or forgiveness, whatever, but you can stop here, warm and dry and safe and quiet. I'll come back to you after midnight. It's the feast of the day, you see. It's the vigil service. Watch and wait and hope." She bounced the haunted woman into a soft chair and found a blanket. Most of the crones were snoring anyway, their heads bobbing up and down on their breastbones, driving softly onto bribs ornamented with green and berries and leaves. A few were telling their beads. The courtyard of the summer was now wild in the last panels for the winter, so it looked like a square fish in the aquarium. Snow falling in it made them peaceful. "Look, you can see snow. It's as white as the face of the unnamed God," said the novice, remembering her pastoral requirements. "Think on that and rest and sleep. Here's a pillow. Here's a stool for your feet. Upstairs we'll be singing and praising the unnamed God. I'll pray for you." "Don't," said the green ghostly guest, then slumped her head against the pillow. "It's my pleasure to," said the novice, a little bit aggressively, and fled just in time to catch the processional hymn. For a while, the winter salon was still. It was like a fishbowl into a new acquisition that had been dropped. The snow moved as if done by a machine, gently and mesmerizingly, with a soft churr. The blossoms of the marginal plants closed a bit on the straightening cold of the room. Oil lamps issued the funeral creep ribbons into the air. On the other side of the garden, hardly visible through the snow and the two windows, a decrepit maunt with a more precise grasp of the calendar than her sisters began to hum a saucy old pagan hymn to Lorraine. Up to the shivering figure of the newcomer came one of the elders, inching forward in a wheelchair. She leaned forward and snapped from the cloak of a plain basket, blue and ivory. She pawned her hands along the armrest. She reached out and touched Elphaba's hand. "Well, the poor dolly is sick. The poor dolly is tired," said the ancient thing. Her hands fell, as the novices had done, for 4 open wounds on the wrist. Nothing Though intact, the poor dolly is in pain, she said as if approving. A dome of near balding scalp came into view under the hood of the blanket. The poor dolly is faint. The poor dolly is faltering. She rocked and pressed Elphaba's hands between her as if to warn them. It was doubtful that her anemic and incompetent old circulatory system could heat a stranger when it could scarcely heat herself. Still, she kept on. The poor puppet is failure itself, she murmured. Happy holidays to one and all. Come, my dear, lay your breast on old mother's bosom. Old Mother Maunt will set things right. She couldn't quite pull Elphaba out of her position of dreamless sleep, this grief. She could only keep Elphaba's hand slightly clutched within her own, as a sepal sockets into the furrows of young petal. Come, my precious, and all will be well. Rest in the bosom of Mother Yakel. Mother Yakel will see you home. And that is the end of City of Emerald. So see you next time for the next part. Bye.